Welcome to the debut episode of Best Asian Horror Movies. I'm your host Blinky, and today we're going to be exploring 2021's The Sadness, a Taiwanese zombie film so brutal and disgusting it would make Art the Clown blush. We're also going to be comparing the themes and settings to the zombie classic 28 Days Later, and then giving the movie an overall score based on story, atmosphere, and sheer unadulterated terror. Now before we begin, please hit that like button and subscribe for more videos. Or else. 2021's The Sadness, directed by Rob Jabbaz, is a Taiwanese horror film set in the midst of a viral outbreak that turns the population into violently depraved infected. Now, these are not the undead zombies you would find in Dawn of the Dead or Walking Dead or any of the other 9,000 undead zombie movies out there, most of which are absolute dog shit, but it follows the same general rules of zombiedom. The virus spreads rapidly through bodily fluids, transforming its victims into sadistic creatures who retain their intelligence but are driven by an uncontrollable urge to commit horrific acts, including extreme violence and sexual, I can't say that on YouTube, let's call it macaroni and cheese. Okay. Now, unlike traditional zombies, the infected in The Sadness maintain their cognitive abilities, which amplifies the terror as they wreak havoc on society. Their ability to talk allows them to manipulate their potential victims, as well as set traps and engage in psychological torture, before the actual torture. Yeah, this movie's really fucked up. There's no way getting around that. The film follows two main characters, Jim, a young man, and his girlfriend, Kat. As the virus begins to spread around Taiwan, the couple becomes separated, each trying to survive in a world rapidly descending into chaos. Jim struggles to protect himself while navigating the brutal landscape of infected citizens. Meanwhile, Kat, trapped in a subway station, faces terrifying choices as the infected around her become more and more dangerous, unaliving and macaroni and cheesing countless victims in their path. The horror in The Sadness is not only in the violent outbreaks, but also in the way the virus strips away any sense of societal order, unleashing humanity's darkest instincts. The film is a visceral, unrelenting exploration of the depravity that can surface when the boundaries of civilization collapse. Horror films, particularly those set within the post-apocalyptic landscape, have long been a way for filmmakers to delve into the darker corners of human nature. Both The Sadness and 28 Days Later are notable entries in this subgenre, exploring the catastrophic effects of a viral outbreak that ravages society. While 28 Days Later is widely considered a seminal work in the modern zombie genre, The Sadness pushes the boundaries of horror further, embracing extreme violence and depravity. Unlike traditional horror films, which often rely on atmosphere or subtle tension, The Sadness is a visceral experience. The film's graphic depictions of gore, violence, and depravity push the boundaries of cinema, making it an uncomfortable yet captivating watch. The characters, particularly the two protagonists, find themselves struggling not only with the external dangers of the infected, but also with the breakdown of social norms. As the virus rapidly spreads, societal structures such as law and order collapse, and humans must resort to brutal tactics to survive. Now, there are some fans of the movie that theorize that as a Taiwanese film, the ludicrous levels of blood and gore are also a subtle middle finger to the government in mainland China and their extreme levels of censorship, which has seen a growing list of media banned from the country. Ultimately, the shock and gore in The Sadness is far from necessary. It's brutality for the sake of entertainment, which some horror fans are becoming increasingly fond of. In contrast, 28 Days Later presents a more traditional but equally horrifying take on a post-apocalyptic world. The film centers around Jim, played by Robert Oppenheimer, who awakens from a coma to discover that a virus known as the Rage has decimated the population of Britain. The infected individuals, driven by an uncontrollable fury, are capable of violent, animalistic behavior. However, unlike the infected in The Sadness, the Ragers in 28 Days Later are not as focused on sadistic acts, but are motivated by rage and primal aggression, attacking anything in their path. Though 28 Days Later also centers on a viral outbreak, its tone is more restrained in terms of graphic violence. The film creates an intense sense of isolation and hopelessness as Jim navigates through a desolate London, encountering the remnants of humanity, many of whom are as dangerous as the infected. The movie emphasizes the psychological toll of living in such a collapsed world, capturing the existential dread that comes with the sudden loss of societal structure. The character's struggle is not just against the infected, but also against each other, as fear, mistrust, and violence breed within the few survivors. Both films share a common theme of societal collapse due to a viral outbreak, but the tone and content of each are shaped by different cultural sensibilities and narrative goals. At the end of the day, we're looking at two movies that were made nearly 30 years apart and on opposite ends of the planet. In The Sadness, the focus is on the grotesque, with the virus serving as a catalyst for an exploration of humanity's darkest impulses. It is not just the infected individuals who become monsters, but also the survivors, who are forced into morally ambiguous situations. The horror of The Sadness is not only about surviving the infected, but also about witnessing the breakdown of civility and encountering the darkest aspects of human nature. The horror in this case is about survival at any cost, even if it means losing one's humanity. 28 Days Later, however, takes a more introspective approach. The horrors of the virus are compounded by the ethical dilemmas faced by the survivors. Kappa's journey is not just about avoiding the infected, but about reconciling with the collapse of civilization and the horrors of human behavior when societal constraints are removed. While 28 Days Later has its fair share of violence, it balances these with moments of hope and human connection. The emotional stakes in 28 Days Later are built around relationships between survivors, such as the fragile bonds between them. The aesthetic choices in both films reflect their different approaches to horror. 28 Days Later is known for its haunting imagery of empty, desolate London streets and the stark contrast between the quiet beauty of a world in ruin and the violence of the infected. On the other hand, The Sadness employs a more visceral and brutal visual style. The film's use of bright, saturated colors and extreme close-ups enhances the intensity of its violent scenes. Now, on a side note, color saturation in Taiwanese films has become a bit of a trope, to be honest. You might be surprised upon arrival to Taipei that the surrounding mountains are not, in fact, a piercing lime green. But I digress. The sheer volume of blood in the film is beyond satirical, with hundreds or even thousands of gallons of fake blood being used throughout the course of filming. These aesthetic choices make The Sadness feel more theatrical and exaggerated, contrasting sharply with the realism of 28 Days Later. Both The Sadness and 28 Days Later explore the theme of a post-apocalyptic world ravaged by a viral outbreak, but they do so in markedly different ways. While 28 Days Later focuses on emotional depth, the psychological toll of survival, and the societal breakdown that ensues, The Sadness takes a more extreme and graphic approach, exploring the brutality of human nature through a violent, no-holds-barred lens. In terms of cultural context, The Sadness taps into a more provocative, boundary-pushing form of horror, while 28 Days Later provides a more nuanced and restrained portrayal of the apocalypse. Both films, however, leave a lasting impact on the viewer, showcasing the myriad ways in which horror can be used to explore human fragility, morality, and the terrifying unknown. Here at Best Asian Horror Movies, we're going to be rating our films based on 3 criteria: story, atmosphere, and terror, with each category eligible for a maximum of 6 bloody skulls. The story in The Sadness is solid, though easily forgettable amidst all the blood and gore. The characters are well developed and there are no moments where it feels bogged down, so I'm gonna go ahead and give it 4 bloody skulls. The world building, tone, and intensity are all excellent. Despite the hyper-exaggerated gore and over-the-top color saturation, the film does a phenomenal job putting the viewer in the midst of a Taipei zombie apocalypse. I'm going to give this 5 bloody skulls. Last but not least, the terror. While the blood and gore here is satirical to the point of being comical, this is hands down one of the most brutal, disgusting, horrifyingly grotesque films I've ever seen. 6 bloody skulls. Well done. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm your host, Blinky. Please hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.